With the UK election almost upon us, you may be looking at the parties and wondering who you should choose. We here at SMNN have compiled this little unbiased reminder about the important things that have happened over the past few years. Remember when Prince Philip died in the middle of COVID and the Queen cut a solitary figure, red-eyed, wearing a mask, alone, like many families who had lost loved ones during the pandemic. And then remember that Boris Johnson and his pals threw a party the night before, when the country was social distancing, when families couldn't see each other. Boris Johnson threw a party before the funeral, and then remember he lied about it, and then he apologized for it, and then he claimed he didn't know the rules that he created. Remember he was fined by the police. Remember Brexit. Remember the Tories said to vote for Brexit so that unelected officials wouldn't have control of the country. Remember how Dominic Cummings, an unelected official, was in control of COVID. Remember Dominic Cummings. Remember his trips to Barnard Castle in Durham. Remember he said it was to test his eyesight. Remember it was all lies. Remember it turned out there was a company in Durham that made PPE. And remember it turned out they won a government contract. Remember it wasn't just a coincidence. Remember Tory peer Michelle Mone. Remember she made millions from COVID but denied it. Remember she denied it repeatedly. Remember she admitted it but then complained she was being made a scapegoat. Remember Liz Truss. Remember how she tanked the economy. Remember she was so bad she left after only 45 days. Remember how she's set to rake in hundreds of thousands as an ex-PM, even though she was in the job for barely more than a month. Remember when Gordon Brown took over from Tony Blair and Boris Johnson said he should resign as the country hadn't voted for him? Do you remember which of these people the country actually voted for? Answers on a postcard to the usual address. Remember the cost of living crisis? Remember how the government put a cap on fuel bills? But then remember that other countries still had much lower energy prices. Remember how customers of EDF in France were paying a fraction of what EDF customers in the UK were paying. Remember before Brexit how we had control of our borders. Remember how you had to show your passport when entering the country and how nothing changed after that. Remember the lie that the Tories told you about taking back our borders. Remember before Brexit, when farmers could export easily to Europe. Remember before Brexit, when Kent wasn't a huge car park for lorries. Remember before Brexit when prices were cheaper. Remember Grenfell. Remember how the Tories promised action. Remember how that never happened. Remember when you could trust BBC News to be impartial. Remember that was before the Tories installed their man as the head of BBC News. Remember when Rishi Sunak announced the election. Remember it turned out a load of Tories had bet on the date of the election. Remember how it wasn't just a coincidence. Remember Mark Menzies. Remember he was suspended over claims that he had used political donations to cover medical expenses and pay off bad people who had locked him in a flat. Remember William Ragg, who gave colleagues phone numbers to some random he met on Grindr. Remember Scott Benton, who was suspended after offering to break lobbying rules for money. Now here's a question. What do these people have in common? If you said they were all suspended for allegations of sexual misconduct, well done, you win a prize. Peter Bone was suspended over bullying and sexual misconduct claims. Chris Pincher quit Parliament after losing an appeal against his suspension following groping allegations. But then remember Boris Johnson hired him anyway, even though he knew about the allegations? David Warburton was suspended for claims of sexual misconduct, which he denied, but he did admit to having a penchant for cocaine. Julian Knight was suspended after sexual assault allegations were made. Remember Andrew Bridgen, who was given the boot after comparing COVID vaccines to the Holocaust? Finally, remember Matt Hancock? Remember that video? Remember he fake cried on TV? So there you have it, our completely unbiased summary of what's been going on. Now the choice is yours. Who do you think will take over when Rishi loses? Chime in with your thoughts down below. We'll bring you more on this breaking news story as details become available. As always, be sure to like and subscribe to SMNN for the most out-of-date, inaccurate, and fabricated content on the internet. Apologies for the AI voice in this episode, but our regular newsreader has a throat infection. We hope to resume normal service shortly.